Hey guys, this is Doug Turk. I'll be hosting this little webinar showing off kind of the new features of Edge Release 12. I see that we've got looks like 27, 28 people in the room right now. Probably give it just a minute or two to see if anybody else hops on here before we get started. But once we're there, I can kind of jump into it and walk y'all through it. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started just to make sure we have enough time to get through everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to run through the new features first, probably. We're going to cover freeze active view, the CAD export overhaul and rename and settings and everything that we added with release 12 to that, formerly known as the laser export. And then we're going to go through the installation drawing tools, the erection sequence assignment tool, and then some of the other enhancements to some older features that have been modernized, updated, some quality of life things, and all of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to get through all that. And then once we're at the end, we'll try and do a little bit of a Q&A. Y'all can ask whatever questions you have there. And then we can go from that point. There's also, I'm not sure exactly how it works, but there's a Teams Q&A section in here somewhere where I think that y'all can type in questions as well. I'll try to keep an eye on that, and we will cover those at the end in addition to whatever live spoken word questions you might have. All right, so let's go ahead and share this. That out of the way. Okay. All right, so jumping in, the first thing we're going to show is the freeze active view tool. This lives under the, currently it's known as the drafting tab. This was previously known as the annotation tab. Technically, that was a mistake that made it into the code, and that's probably something that'll get name changed back at some point during the release 12 cycle. But if you see drafting instead of annotation there, that's what's going on. But the freeze active view tool exists under that menu. And basically what this is going to do is it's if you've used some of the freeze drawing examples that Autodesk has provided in the past, you'll be somewhat familiar with the operation of this tool. But the idea is that it's going to take your active view and generate dumb line work that you can manipulate however you want as a detail view based on whatever you have in your current screen. So we're going to go ahead, and I've built this little test model. Obviously, it's not particularly realistic, but it should let us kind of show off all the different things we're trying to show. I've assembled one of these walls, and that's kind of going to be the one we're working through with a lot of these tools. So down here, if we look at this, I've drawn a section in this showing just a small piece of the assembly, which I'm going to pull up here. And let's say that I wanted to freeze this. Maybe I want the crop region or for some reason, and I'm going to freeze this view so that I could drag it onto a sheet or use it as a legend or whatever I might want to do with it later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this. I'm going to go to my drafting tab, run the freeze active view utility, and I'm going to get a couple of options here. So I can hit continue, and I'm just going to go through with the defaults, and it would generate the legend and do all of that. But first, we're going to look at the different options you have available. So most of these here on the left side are not going to matter too much to you. These are because of the way it works under the hood, we're essentially leveraging the DXF or DWG export features of Revit and then pulling those back in to generate the drawing. These settings on the left are some of the settings that Autodesk provides for that DWG export. They won't really affect 9 out of 10 cases with this, but I felt like it was important to give you guys the flexibility just in case there's some use case that you find where you want to be able to configure these. If you want more details on what each of these settings does, look into the documentation for those features in Autodesk's information, or look at the help file for this utility where I've kind of summed it up in 1 or 2 sentences. The biggest one that I think people will interact with is the color settings. You can choose to either do black and white, you can use the view colors, or you can use inverted colors. In this case, my view is already black and white, so I'm just going to go with the black and white setting, but these are fairly self-explanatory aside from that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK and continue. And what we're going to see is that it'll tell us that we successfully froze the view, and it's going to ask if we want to switch to it. If I expand this for details, it'll tell me what my current view was and what it copied it to. So in this case, I'm going to hit yes, and it's going to pull up my legend here. And as you can see, this is just an imported symbol. And if I actually wanted to go in and modify the line work, I can unpin this. I can do a full explode, and now all of this is just, detail lines. And, again, this could be used if I wanted to come up here and pull this onto my sheet, for example, now I can do so. So that's kind of all there is to the Freeze Active View tool. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but I think it should allow a lot of different things that we kind of supported before through other utilities and through some of the Revit out of the box stuff, but it kind of brings everything together and provides a little bit more quality of life there. So moving on from that, the next big change with release 12 from release 11 in that cycle is this CAD Export update. So previously, some of y'all might have been familiar with this as the laser export, which lived here in the ticket tools. We renamed that to the CAD Export since with the updates that we've added, we have a little bit more flexibility in what we export and what some of the use cases for that would be. So it's now known as the CAD Export. But before I get into actually running the tool itself, I want to show you some of the settings that we've added, since that's really where the meat and potatoes of what's being improved here is found. So let's go to our user settings, to our CAD Export settings, and this is a completely new menu. So you're going to notice a couple things here. One, this has configuration options not only for the CAD export, which is what I'm discussing now, but also for the installation export, which is our DWG installation sheet export, which is found under the installation menu. So you might be familiar with both of these tools. They kind of serve similar purposes, just one's for pieces, one's for installation. And the configuration settings are found in the same location since there's a lot of shared DNA in how these actually work. So the first thing that you might notice here is that all of these settings that are currently in the tool are based off of what the laser export and based off of what the installation export are doing today in Edge 11. This is just to make sure that there's no interruption of service with what you were already doing. If you're used to it working a certain way, we're not mixing that up on you. We're just giving you the option to change it if you have specific needs or desires with how that should work. So I'm just going to kind of quickly run through these different tabs and explain what they do. So the first one being the file setup. You can now configure where you actually want these files to export. The default path, which I'll show you via the Restore Defaults button, is the old laser export path. In my case, I've created a special one for today. I'm actually going to close and reset that so that we have that folder that I had set before. I created a special one for today's purposes, but that default is again the same as what it was in Edge 11. But this lets you choose the folder path that it's going to send these files to. It lets you choose a custom suffix to attach to the end of the file name before the extension. Currently, it's this laser file, but this can be whatever you want just so that you can identify those files. And it's going to tell you down here at the bottom what file it's actually sending out. And it's going to say, here's your folder path. It's going to tell you this is going to be the project number hyphen project name. And then this is going to be the, I believe, project number hyphen piece name followed by file name, suffix, and extension. We also support DWG and DXF. I believe before we only supported DWG, hence the default being that. But now you can go to either or both. Moving on, I guess first, Installation Export has a very similar file setup page, exactly the same premise. The file path is just slightly different because of the way that the Installation Export works versus the laser. So moving on, we have the layer setup. So let's actually come back to this in a moment. So the first thing that we should talk about is how the layers work. So there's several different kind of categories of elements that we send out and different buckets that we put things on, which are intended to map to a layer in the export. So we have our TIF elements, our BIF elements, and our SIF elements. Pretty self-explanatory. I'll come back to what these different radio boxes mean and these different fields. But for now, we're going to talk about the layers. So TIF, BIF, and SIF elements are covered here. Form elements is going to be things in the boundary of the piece. Pretty self-explanatory. Corbel elements represents the outer part of a corbel sitting on the top face, I believe. It's going to be elevated at whatever the thickness of that corbel is. Architectural elements is going to be stuff like your reveals, and then strand elements is the new one, which is going to be strand in the piece, placed at the location where that strand is in the piece, so at that depth. Again, you'll notice that each of these has a layer assigned to it to tell it where to send this in the export. And if I click on any of these drop downs, I'm going to see a list of all of the layers I have available, as well as a disabled option. So this is where the new features start coming in. Before, you couldn't turn off any one layer. You couldn't really configure what was going to happen. It was going to send all of these things to their respective layers. Now it's a little bit different. You can go in and you can say, well, I don't want to see architectural elements. Maybe I don't necessarily care about my corbels, but I want to see TIF, BIF, SIF, and form, right? So I can go in and disable those things. Or if for whatever reason I want to say, I don't know, maybe I want to see my corbels at the form layer and merge these two together, you could do that as well. I'm not going to for this example, but you could do that. And all of those layers that it's picking from are set up in this layer setup window. So here you have the option to rename these. So I could change, BIF to be ZC BIF underscore plates. I could, well, I guess I can't actually use an underscore, sorry. But, I could add plates to all of these. I could, remove text, whatever, do any kind of renaming that you want there. I can also create additional layers. I don't have to have exactly ones that map to all the categories. So I can create one here that's just called test that's yellow. There's no restrictions on what you can do here, aside from the layer colors that we support are all, they're all of the ones that were used in the previous export tools. Because they map to certain indices in the AutoCAD format, we didn't want to stray too far away from that yet, just because we were concerned about some compatibility issues. So we kind of kept those guardrails around everything, but you can choose any color from this list for any layer. So as we can see, now I've called this test. If I come in here, I can see where my plates names came in on my elements here. And I can also see if I were to go in here and say I actually wanted corbels on this test layer, I can do that now too. But notice also that the corbel layer still exists, it's just not assigned. Okay, so let's say that we saved this. We're going to change this to say CAD file because again, it's a new name. Let's save these settings for now. Same thing with the installation export. You're going to notice this one's a little bit more simple than the laser because it doesn't have additional customization beyond I want these things on this layer. These will always behave the same way and they will always go to the assigned layer. But other than that, it's exactly the same process: layer name, layer color, assigned via dropdown. Now, the one thing that I do want to talk about with lasers before we get too far out of here is this page. So before, if you've used the laser export, TIF elements and BIF elements were always represented as their bounding box in the layer that they existed in, or not, well, not that they existed in the layer of their location and form that they had assigned. And I know that that caused some frustration because certain people wanted to see certain symbols for different things. Maybe you wanted to see circles instead of bounding boxes for certain things. Um, so on, so on. But before we were restricted to the bounding boxes. Now you have some control over that. So these radio buttons are fairly self-explanatory. Instead of the bounding box, this will export a circle centered on the center of that bounding box. You can choose the radius in inches of the circle that we're going to draw. This controls both the BIF and the TIF circle if you chose one or the other. That's kind of the simple way of controlling this. Additionally, if you recall with the side and form elements, they were represented as tick marks coming off the side of the piece. You now have control over the length of those tick marks as well. Now, the one on here that's a little bit more complicated that won't make a lot of sense until I actually go in and show you the export is the edge CAD lines. So what this provides is a way to get greater control over these three types of elements and actually draw your own line work and custom symbols to represent how you want these to come through. I'm going to put a pin in that and we'll see it in the export and I can kind of show you what's going on there. But that's kind of the 1,000-yard view of what those look like. So for now, we are going to uncheck that and we're going to save, close, and we're going to close the settings window. And we are going to run the CAD Export tool, which is not over there. It's over here. Okay. And clearly I didn't save that right, but that's okay. And we're going to see the little file path preview update with whatever I've just typed here. These choices are temporary choices for this export. They won't update your settings. They will just affect what you're about to do in this particular execution of the tool. So if I hit export now, I'm going to see that this successfully went to that folder and to that file. So I'm going to go there. And we're going to open the new one because I was messing with this earlier. And we can see that our export pretty much matches what we were expecting. So we can see our top inform elements got these purple circles because we told them to do purple, or well, we told them to do circles rather. And we can see that our corbels, it's hard to see here, but our corbels came through in that yellow test layer. We can see that our strand came through as these white lines, and basically everything matches the configuration that we gave it. Again, though, we're seeing that these are bounding boxes and these are circles. So the next thing that I want to show is the edge CAD lines and how they affect this export. So let's go ahead and close this and come back to our Revit session. And let's go turn on edge CAD lines and save that. Okay, going to export. And something I will point out real quick too, because I forgot to mention it, is when you're doing this export, you will now get a little warning saying you're about to overwrite something. This is just to prevent, like, if you didn't know that someone already exported the piece you're doing, this just gives you a quick little nudge to say, hey, make sure you're not overwriting something that you're actually already happy with. I meant to point that out earlier, but that is a new feature. Okay, so let's go ahead and open this back up because we went to the same file name, and we're going to see some different behavior from what we had. So I'm going to zoom in on the piece so you can actually see what we're dealing with, but you can see now and I shouldn't have chosen yellow for my corbels because it's just making things confusing. But you can see now that we have, in where we had those things previously assigned top or bottom, we actually see that we have some different line work on the top and the bottom for those. We see that these plates up here actually have a bottom that's kind of in the middle of the field and some interesting stuff going on. So what this is the edge CAD line setup. So all of these little rectangles, all of these little boxes that are rendered here were things that were drawn in the family using some new line styles. So if we come in here to our assembly, we will see that we have a few different kinds of plates here. So one is this double plate, and we have two of them that are top in form and one of them that's bottom in form. And then the others are these little plates here. So I'm going to hop into this double plate family real quick and point out a couple things. So as we can see, this thing kind of is lit up like a Christmas tree. It has a bunch of different colors in it. And these are different CAD line styles. So these top ones, these purple ones, are what we call the Edge LIF CAD lines. And what those are going to do is whatever line work you have in this style will be rendered at the location and form that that element lives at. So since these, well, we had two that were top and two that were bottom, the ones that were top had this line work rendered in the top layer, and the ones that were bottom had this line work rendered in the bottom layer. Likewise, at the bottom, we have our other line style, which is the opposite LIF CAD line style. This is going to render at the other one. So if it had top assigned, this will render at bottom. If it had bottom assigned, this will render at top. Now the oddball is the SIF CAD line because it's the third option. It doesn't have any kind of sidedness. This is going to be what renders in the location it's at when the element is side in form. So in this case, we have kind of this little line work showing what the plate would look like from the side. Again, this has a little bit of a learning curve to it, and you'll have to kind of figure this out when you want to update your families, and you'll have to update your templates to hide these and do all that good stuff. But once you get a grasp on it, it really gives you a lot of control over what your CAD exports look like, both because you have some dynamic functionality in how these get assigned, as well as the fact that you can kind of control where they show up by physically placing them into the family in those locations. So that's kind of the gist of the CAD export. And if you're curious what this family looked like, it was basically the same thing, just with the opposite lines at the bottom of these studs. And that's why we were seeing these yellow spots in the middle, because again, these are rendering physically where they are in the family when they're in that assembly you've exported. Okay. So again, if there's any questions on that, we'll come back to them at the end, but that's the rundown on how to make that work. Okay, so now that we're good with the CAD export, oh, I do actually want to mention one more thing with CAD export before I move on, just because it is tangentially related, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit because this is one of the enhancements to our older tools, but we've gotten enough complaints about it, enough people having trouble with it that I want to address it. We did update the location and form algorithm a little bit with this update. Essentially, we now take into account the orientation of the element on top of its position in the piece and kind of make some judgments based on that to figure out the location and form a little bit more accurately than what we were doing before. So hopefully that'll be a lot better for you guys once you start using this. So I wanted to mention that before I move on. All right, so the next tool the next suite of tools that I want to talk about is the installation drawing tools. So this is one of the other really big features that we brought in with this update that we think should save a lot of time for everybody. So all of these live under the installation dropdown within the Edge menu. We have 3 new tools, well, really 4 as part of this whole suite, which are the installation drawing master utility, which generates installation drawings for basically everything in the piece and creates a project level sheet with that information. The assembly installation drawing tool, where you basically tell the program which assembly you want to work with and which sheet you want to place them on, and it will generate installation drawings for everything in that assembly and place them onto that sheet. And then the installation drawing mark, where you pick a specific installation mark and generate drawings for that mark wherever you happen to be. And we will run through those in just a moment. And then the last tool is obviously the settings, where you kind of control how those drawings get generated. And what this tool is doing at its core for all of these different versions of itself is generating 2D line work to represent each unique installation mark in your project. The only exception to that is we do not generate installation drawings of sheets where the way that we check it is that the volume of the installation piece is equal to its length times its width times its height, so that we're not just spamming you with a bunch of different drawings of full sheets. Instead, we render anything that's been modified in some way, either through recesses, cuts, or any other kind of modification along those lines. We then generate 2D line work, place it onto a legend, and then depending on which tool you're using, we do different things with it. So what this settings file is telling us is which line styles to use when generating those things, which line styles to use for the installation mark annotation, what the text needs to look like, the dimensions, all that good stuff. None of this should be particularly unfamiliar if you've messed with our ticket settings at any point. It's very, very similar to all of that. So we're not going to look at the settings too deeply right now. We can come back to that once we've run the tool a couple times. So the first one that I'm going to show is the master. It's a very simple process to run it. You just run the tool. It's set to the project scope. So it's going to do everything in your job. It's going to ask you what scale you want to use. This is going to automatically populate with whatever you set up in your settings, but you can override it with this dialog here. So let's go ahead and run that. And it's going to ask you to put in your initials. So this way on the sheets that it generates, there's some log of who actually generated those drawings. So if something goes wrong or something needs updates, you can find that person. In this case, I'll put DT. And once it's done, it's going to tell you what all was created and where it went. So this is telling us the names of the sheets and the legends that are associated with them. These will always be named the same way. It'll be this INS-index of which sheet it is. And the legend will always be named installation detail hyphen lowest mark on the page to highest mark on the page. So in this case, we ended up creating 3 sheets. So it opened the third one because that was the last one, which is intentional, but let's just go here. All right, so we can see now in our sheets that we have these master installation sheets. It tells us the names. Whoops, didn't mean to click that. There we go. And you'll notice that these have all come in nicely in a grid. You've got your dimensions to all of the different contours in the shape of the thing. And you also have callouts for any recesses and how deep they are in that piece of insulation. Additionally, we write the mark right below it, and these come in order of lowest to highest, left to right, top to bottom. Now you'll also notice that this came in nicely squared up in the middle of our title block. So one thing that the master installation drawing tool is going to look at is within your title block, we now let you set up these installation draw padding bottom left right top parameters. This is telling the program, here's where I want my cursor to start when I'm generating these installation drawings, and here's where I want it to stop. So what I've done is I've basically set up formulas within my title block to actually take where this line work starts and stops and then add a specific buffer to that, but you can customize it however you would like. And then, I mean, you can kind of get the gist from any of these, but it's essentially a legend going onto a sheet and then being named in that way. One thing to note about these drawings, and this applies to all of these tools, is that it's just like the installation placement as far as the rules about what those families need to have in them. I believe that the rule is the manufacturer component needs to contain both the term edge and the term insulation, but double check the help file to make sure that your families are compliant with what it's trying to do. But if they're compliant with the placement tools, then they will work with this. And the Edge installation family that we provide via the Edge browser is compatible with all of this. Okay, so the next one will show the assembly installation drawing tool. In this case, I've created a dumb little sheet that basically just shows the panel with all of its insulation marks for itself. And we are going to go ahead and create an insulation drawing for each of those marks. I guess that is another thing that I want to point out is the insulation drawing tool also only works on insulation that has been marked and locked via the insulation marking tool. We won't draw any unmarked insulation so we don't clutter up your model. Okay, so now if we run the insulation drawing assembly tool, I suppose I should actually show that. You can either run the tool and then select the assembly. You can multi-select if you wanted to do multiple at once. In this case, I'm just doing one. Or you can pre-select an assembly to do that as well. And then once you get in here, you can choose which sheet you actually want to end up placing the legend onto. Obviously, if you want to move that around or delete it or change that, you can post-fact, but we want to place it onto some existing sheet on that assembly. Again, you can override whatever setting you configured for the scale. In this case, I'm going to keep it with the default for now, but we can look at that in a minute if we want to. We're going to see it come in here. There we go. We're going to see it come in here just as a horizontal stretch of these drawings. We're not trying to figure out how to fit this within your title block because we don't necessarily know what you're trying to do. But because it's dumb line work, you can obviously drag these around however you want. You know, if you wanted to do something like just taking this and putting it here and then kind of moving them around until they work, that's something that you could do. We just kind of figured that it was better to leave that in y'all's hands instead of trying to automate something and slowing your process down. But it will generate drawings for all of the insulation in that assembly when you do so. So the last one that we're going to look at is the insulation drawing mark tool. And this is kind of what we think of as the atomic unit of insulation drawing, right? You choose whichever insulation marks that you actually want to draw, and then you navigate to the sheet you want to draw them on, and you can draw them from that point. So what we're going to do, actually, let me take a look at something real quick. All right, so what we're going to do is we are going to draw, and this isn't necessarily how you would use this in reality. This is more, the way that we see this being useful is if you did a master drawing and something changed with one of the pieces of insulation and you need to change it, you could delete it, go in, generate a drawing for that mark, and then place it in. I guess, you know, actually we could do that. Let's do that. So let's come in here and let's say that we didn't like the drawing that it created for number 17. Okay. We could now go insulation drawing mark, pick number 17, continue. And we're going to get this little dashboard that hovers around saying what the active view is and which marks you pick to draw. And the reason for this is that this lets you kind of choose where you actually want to go when you're placing these. Just so that you know where they're going to show up. Because with this tool, there's no restrictions on where it can go. It can go on legends, detail views, any kind of drawing that you have where you can draw line work, we're letting you place these. So we're going to go ahead and hit place drawings now. And we're going to see it come in right where it was. Again, if you made a change to that insulation piece, you just delete the line work out, run that tool and place it right in. Easy peasy, nothing to it. So one more thing that I want to show with this, especially with regards to the masters, is let's say, and this is kind of a bad example, I'm going to cheat a little bit to show it, but let's say that we were working on, actually here, let's go to Let's go to our highest number 1, right? And obviously right now 63 is our biggest number. But let's say that we went in here and now all of a sudden, we're just going to take this random piece. Actually, no, we're not going to take that one because it's not going to let me because it's a full sheet. But we'll take this one, and let's say this one's now insulation mark 100, okay? Obviously, this breaks the rules. This is not the way that you would necessarily use this legitimately, but let's just say that there was a new mark that came in. Now, there's a couple different things I can do here. If I had multiple, one thing I can do is I can actually rerun the insulation drawing master utility, and it's going to look at all of my multiple new insulation marks, and it's going to try to either fill in the rest of the last sheet that I had or create a new sheet and start from there and draw all of the new marks. But since I only have one, I don't necessarily want to go to all that headache. So I'm just going to say insulation mark. I have number 100 pre-selected, so it's going to know that's the one that I'm trying to draw. So I'm going to come over here to my insulation view 3. It is going to say if you're on a sheet, we don't think that that's probably what you're trying to do. So we're going to warn you with this red text saying, hey, activate the legend that you want to place this on. So I'm going to do what it says. And then we are going to, I don't know why the text isn't going away, but that's okay. We'll hit place drawing and it'll actually come in right here. And it's going to ask me, do I want to adjust the master drawing range for new marks? What that means is it's going to actually rename that master drawing to say this is no longer from 50 to 63. This is now 50 to 100. So we'll go ahead and say yes to that. And we'll see that the sheet group updated, and we're also going to see the legend name updated. And this is now number 100. So again, that's kind of the gist on the insulation drawing tools. If you want to look into more on that, there's a lot of good details in the help files. Or if you run into any problems with it, feel free to send a message to our help desk. And obviously, in a minute, we'll try and get to the Q&A. I know we're kind of running a little longer than I meant to here, but we'll leave time for that for sure. Okay. So the next tool to cover, the next and last new big feature is the erection sequence tool. So let's go ahead and close all of our insulation views here. Whoops, not the model. That's not what I want. And let's go ahead and open a couple of views that I've prepared for this demonstration. So you'll notice I now have two 3D views here set up. One that is the erection sequence assigning view and one that is the erection sequence assigned view. These two views, all that I did with them is I assigned these two templates, assigning and assigned. These are generated by the project shared parameters tool for you when you run that, which you should do whenever you download the update. And these are used with the erection sequence utility. So what this is actually going to let you do is it's going to let you see on one of your views all of the pieces in your model that don't yet have an erection sequence assigned to them. And over here, it's going to show you the ones that do have ones assigned. And what this tool does is it's actually going to let you click through the entire model, assigning erection sequence values as well as zone numbers and names to all of the pieces in your model so that you can get a true erection sequence assigned at the model level. So let's go ahead and run it. So the first thing that we're going to run into here is our zone configuration. In this case, all that I have in here is just one called Zone 1. You can click in here and rename this if I want to say, first zone or whatever it may be. You can add more zones. You can rename them. You can do all kinds of different things. And if I don't like the order that I had them in originally, I can actually drag them around as well. The other buttons that are available in here, you can reset zones. This is basically just a discard changes button. And then reset sequence we'll get to in a minute. But other than that, these are all just controlling the zone settings. We're going to tell the program we want to start with first zone, which is zone number 1. We are going to assign erection sequences to these things. And see here, it's basically telling me, hey, you changed the name from zone 1 to first zone. If I had things with erection sequence assigned, that would cause a change in a parameter on all of those elements. So it's just telling you, hey, you're about to modify a bunch of model elements. Are you sure you want to do that? So we're going to hit yes because nothing's actually assigned. So now that we're in the assignment mode, it's going to say in the bottom left here, prompting what we're actually doing. Pick which piece you want to assign the erection sequence of 1, because we're on the first one, for the first zone. So we're just going to start clicking things. Now it's going to say number 2. Let's just pull our view out here so we can actually see everything as it comes in. And as you can see, you just kind of click through these, and they come in sequence. So let's say that I'm done with the first zone now that I've done these walls, and I'm going to go ahead and hit escape. So once I'm done doing that zone, it's going to ask what I want to do next, because there's a few different options. You can continue using the next zone, which means it's going to look down the sequence and it's going to pick zone number 2, which was second zone, I think I called it. I can go back to that window if I want to choose a completely different one. I can say I didn't mean to hit escape and I want to keep going with number 1, or I can say I'm done and I want to close the tool. In this case, I'm going to say continue using the next zone, and we'll just do these. Obviously, this isn't necessarily a realistic order you would do things in, but for the sake of demonstration. So now I hit escape. I no longer have continue to next because that was the last zone I have available. But if I went back to select new, I could add a new one and keep going from there. For now, though, I'm going to hit finished. And now I've got these things assigned. So what I want to point out about this is if I go to, and I preset this up, but I'll show you what I did in here. But I can now create a schedule here where I'm tracking a few different parameters that we're assigning to. And what these parameters are called is in the help file, but you can see it here as well. Let's just get this out of the way. I'm actually going to regret that, but that's okay. So the important parameters for this tool are the erection sequence number, the erection sequence zone name, and the erection sequence zone number. I'm going to explain what this first one is in just a moment, but I do need my properties tab back. Okay. So again, zones all have an index. They have to be in order, and then the number is assigned per zone. So what I'm showing here in this schedule is that you actually have options to create a unified global erection sequence, which is what this is. And the way that I did that here is I just created a formula. Oops, not like that. There we go. I just created a formula where I essentially take the zone number and I multiply it by 1,000. Whoops. There we go. I multiply it by 1,000 and then add the erection sequence number to it, creating a clearly sorted, organized global erection sequence if that's what you prefer. There's a lot of different ways to do this. You could also, write a Dynamo script that copies that over later, whatever you want to do. Or if you're happy with just having the zone-based numbering, that's what we do by default. But I wanted to point that out because that is an important part of the erection sequence, since you probably want one continual sequence there. So something to note as well is if I come back into my tool, I am not actually in my view, so it's warning me. I guess I should have pointed that out probably. If you go in through the any view, not that one here, let's just open the default. If you come into the tool from one that doesn't have one of those templates assigned, you can do that. We're not going to stop you, but we're just saying, hey, you might want to apply this template or this filter to make it work. So we're going to come back to here. It's getting mad at me because I'm running it from the assigned side, which doesn't make sense to do, but here we go. Okay, so what's going to happen here, because I already have things, is if I go into the assign tool, it's going to tell me, hey, this zone already has things. Do you want to reset it, or do you want to start at the next value? This is just to give you some flexibility over how you interact with this. I'm going to just cancel and then show that you also have a button here called reset sequence. If you click that, it's going to purge all 3 of those parameters from everything in the model. I'm just going to do that for now, and we see that we're back to nothing. So again, this is a pretty big tool for us. I think we're excited to see how you guys use this. Should make this process a lot easier, a lot more interactive. We have some plans in the future for creating better ways to see the erection sequence live once it's been assigned as kind of a viewer, but that's a little bit down the road. For now, though, we have the sequencing tool, and it's found here under the scheduling tab. All right, so that's the last of the new features. I'm not necessarily going to demo the enhancements because I think we're pretty much out of time. But the big enhancements that I do want to cover are, we have well, I said I'm not going to demo them, but I am going to at least show you what the new control number incrementer looks like. We've expanded the control number incrementer to not just be manually assigning one by one by one. You now can run it on a scope. This was something that was requested and I think is going to save a lot of time as well. What this is going to do is it's going to simulate as though you clicked through things in their element ID order, which is somewhat arbitrary, but at least it gives you a way to do that without having to get too granular with it. So what would happen is if I went to the whole model, I now have the same settings that I had before, but it's going to actually assign control numbers to everything in that model without needing any additional input. So we're just going to do it for now. And it should go pretty quick. But again, pretty simple update, but hopefully that will save y'all some time so you're not having to click through everything in the job when you're assigning those. You also do get the option, if you were to try and run it again, it would ask if you want to clear the control numbers that were there, if there were already values there, or if you want to start from the highest one. In fact, if you choose, it doesn't force you to start from the highest one. It's going to actually just default that. Whoops, it doesn't like it because everything has a control number. Hold on. There we go. As long as we have one that doesn't, it'll work. It's going to just put that in as the default, and then you could change this if you wanted to start from a different number than whatever the highest actually is. This just gives you some customization over what you're doing if there's some strange oddball circumstance that you need to do that in. The other big enhancement is changing insulation markings comparisons of volume to be a percentage comparison rather than an absolute number that you're feeding it. This helps with when you have, small little chunked up pieces of insulation alongside big full sheets or close to full sheets. That tolerance now is not going to be, difficult to work with. It's going to be scaling with whatever's being compared. And then lastly, aside from the location and form enhancements that we already mentioned, the other one to bring up is that mark verification existing now ignores embeds that have multiply for marks enabled. This was just kind of a long-standing thing that we needed to take care of, and that's now been done with release 12. So again, that's pretty much everything I have to talk about. There's some other quality of life things behind the scenes that have changed, some clone ticket bug fixes, nothing that I necessarily want to get into with this conversation, but they are listed in the changelog. So if you see that, that's kind of what we're talking about there. So now I'm going to shut up and we can try and fit in some Q&A here. I don't necessarily mind if we need to go a little bit over time to cover Q&A. So whatever we need to do to make that happen. Not sure how best to organize this. I guess just if anybody has a question, they can chime in now. That's a good question. Yeah, if anyone has something or if anyone's struggling to be able to unmute, hopefully y'all can maybe post in the meeting chat or if someone can try unmuting and seeing if it works, that would help too.
Hey, Doug.
Hey. And if there's no questions, that's fine too. That just means I did a great job.
I hate to take over, but we forgot to mention the square insulation sheets that were detailed. I saw the one that was 7 and 11 inches.
Oh yeah, sure. I can bring that up. So basically what that is, and let me find, that was probably on that third sheet, right?
I think so.
Yeah, this guy. Yeah, so that is a good point. Thank you for bringing that up, Taylor. So this is a limitation right now of the tool. If you have a piece of insulation, despite the rule that I said where we don't draw, full length by width by height sheets, if this is created by a void, fully shaving off one edge of the insulation, sometimes the algorithm will get confused and not identify it as a full length by width by height sheet, and it will generate a drawing despite that. So that is a known limitation. I believe it's cited in the help file. If it's not, we will update that and get it in there.
Hey Doug, can you hear me okay?
Yep, sure can.
When you run the control number incrementer on the whole model, is it
Mhm.
just randomly picking pieces to,
Yeah,
or
so
you're gonna get them numbers varying across, let's say, an elevation or something like that?
yeah, so if you choose the whole model, what it's doing under the hood is it's basically just sorting them by element ID. So it's not technically random, but it may as well be once you get pretty deep into the model, obviously. If you wanted to do just everything on a level, you obviously have access to, active view or selection group or some of those other choices. But yeah, within the group that you choose, it's going to be a semi-arbitrary numbering that's technically the element ID order.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm. Yeah, and I guess I should have pointed this out. The manually assign button is how you get the previous functionality of clicking through everything. It's all under one button now. Any other questions? And if you think of something later, feel free to shoot an email to me or to well, I say me, dterk@ptac.com, or to our support help desk, edgesupport@ptac.com. I can get back to you with answers that way if you prefer that. Yes, that's a good point. We will also have a recording available of everything that we just went through here. This team's webinar has been recorded the whole time, so if there's something that made sense when I was describing it, but when you go to replicate it, you want to go back and check the video, that'll be available as well.
Doug, I got one more, then I'll leave you
Okay.
alone.
Hey, no problem.
So on that freeze, the drawing freeze or freeze active
Sure.
view,
Mhm.
so when you do that and then you explode, what are you doing with all of your extra line types, and if there's regions in there, because you're getting
Sure.
all of the CAD import
Yeah, let's do
styles?
this. Let's just do a weird section box in here. No, that was not what I wanted to do. Hold on. That's a good question. Let me open those. There we go. So let's say that we just wanted to freeze like this corner of the model for some reason. Just keep the defaults, I think. So obviously you're going to see these kind of fills come in and make this pretty unreadable. If I unpin this sucker and full explode it, it's going to take a second because there's a lot of stuff in here. May have underestimated how long it would take to explode. We will see. Yeah, we'll see. It actually got upset about some of the filled regions it created when I exploded it. So it might do what I was going to show anyway, but you can see that these actually do come through as these different filled regions, and you can just kind of do what you want with them. I mean, ultimately, the behavior of this tool is no different than if you went through all the steps of export to CAD, brought it back in, all of that stuff. So whatever holds true for that holds true for this. But you can see that it did create all these different fills for those different shaded elements of the 3D view.
Right. And you haven't noticed any sort of where it bogs Revit down?
I mean, probably if you got enough of them in there, it would. You just have to kind of use it responsibly, I think. Ultimately, it's just going to come down to the same kind of best practices with anything else in the model of just be aware of what you're putting in so that you're aware of what's coming out. But we didn't want to put too much extra processing in there of trying to figure out what someone may or may not want from that explode. So we pretty much just do it one-to-one with whatever it generated. Okay, anyone else? Are we all happy? All right, well, if that's it, thank you all for attending. Really appreciate it. Hopefully that was some useful information. I know we kind of had to move through it at a pretty quick pace because there was a lot packed into this one, but like I said, hopefully this all makes your lives better. And if you have any questions or any issues getting it up and running, just feel free to reach out to any of us and we'll help you out. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Thank you.